Psalm 4 today. Psalm 4. We'll go ahead, we'll start by reading it, and then we'll go back through and visit the outline and some notes along with Brother Waycaster. The psalmist writes, "Hear me when I call, O God of my righteousness. Thou hast enlarged me when I was in distress. Have mercy upon me and hear my prayer. O ye sons of men, how long will ye turn my glory into shame? How long will ye love vanity and seek after leasing? Selah. But know that the Lord hath set apart him that is godly for himself. The Lord will hear when I call unto him. Stand in awe and sin not. Commune with your own heart upon your bed and be still. Selah. Offer the sacrifices of righteousness and put your trust in the Lord. There be many that say, Who will show us any good? Lord, lift thou up the light of thy countenance upon us. Thou hast put gladness in my heart more than in the time that their corn and their wine increased. I will both lay me down in peace and sleep, for thou, Lord, only makest me dwell in safety." Okay, so kind of like with the third psalm, actually several similarities we'll touch on with the third psalm. For one, if you notice the superscription, there's a word there that's likely unfamiliar, kind of like this word Selah that we find I think on two occasions in this psalm, if I counted correctly. We saw it in Psalm 3 as well, that word Selah, S-E-L-A-H. As I mentioned last week when we discussed the third psalm, no one really knows exactly what it means, which is the case with a number of ancient Hebrew words. But it's generally believed to be a word that indicates a pause or a rest in the psalm. Also in the superscription to the chief musician on Neganoth. Neganoth is a word that denotes various types of stringed instruments. So this would be directed towards toward the musician who leads that particular section in the temple. You'll notice, if you compare Psalm 4 with Psalm 3, it probably strikes you that they're very similar. They both have 8 verses. They both have the same metric scheme, and they're generally believed to both be related to the same occasion. Psalm 3, it's actually in the superscription when he was fleeing from Absalom, his son. Certainly, as we discussed with Psalm 3, it fits. It certainly fits that occasion. Psalm 4 is believed to be the same circumstance, even though the superscription doesn't specify it for Psalm 4. And sometimes you'll find Psalm 3 referred to as the Mourning hymn, M-O-R-N-I-N-G-E. So mourning as in the beginning of day, not as in grieving. Psalm 3, the Mourning hymn. Psalm 4, the Evening hymn. And Barnes, noted Old Testament commentator, has suggested that the one would be recited in the morning, the other in the evening. So you have all these similarities in terms of the length, the rhyming scheme, the metric scheme, the supposed occasion for their composition, authorship. Both of them are attributed to David. So if you break down this psalm, we can break it down into 5 sections. In the first verse, the psalmist calls upon God to hear him and reflects upon the fact that God had helped him in times past. In verses 2 through 5, the psalmist addresses his enemies directly, and he gives counsel as to what they should do. So again, very similar to the third psalm, this circumstance where you have the psalmist imploring God for help, beset by enemies, very, very similar. Verses 6 and 7, the psalmist contrasts the sources of his joy with the sources of his enemies' joy. And then verse 8, we find the consequence. The result of all, and in view of all these mercies and comforts, the psalmist says that he will lie down calmly and sleep. It's very similar to the confidence and the courage that we found expressed in Psalm 3. Again, very, very similar thought, very similar conclusion here in Psalm 4. Okay, so starting out with verse 1. The first verse is a call to action. The writer asks God to hear him. The ASV, so the King James rather, has answer me when I hear. Call in the ASV here in the King James Version. But there's the idea of a sense of listening in a favorable way, right? So he's calling upon God, asking him to hear, not just in a literal sense, that he can actually, perhaps physically or metaphorically hear what he's saying, but listen to me in a favorable sense. I'm one of your people. I'm calling out for help. Pay attention. Give heed to it. He calls out to the God of my righteousness. So there's a personal aspect to David's plea. There's an expectation that God will do what is right, which is inclusive in the word righteousness. A simple working definition for the word righteous is right doing. It's doing the right thing. Okay. Thou hast set me at large when I was in distress. King James, thou hast enlarged me when I was in distress. So some past experience in his life is being recalled, and in view of the past experiences, he's projecting hope toward future deliverance. God has helped him in the past, right? And so he's calling out to God, calling upon his righteous God to help him, to have mercy upon him, which suggests an attitude of humility on the part of the writer. Right? I mean, he understands that God's blessings are not merited. Right? He is pleading for God's mercy. He knows he certainly is in no place to demand it. Have mercy upon me and hear my prayer. Okay, so calls out to God with tremendous confidence. Certainly seems to have the right kind of spirit and disposition in so doing. Verses 2 through 5. He's going to give counsel to his enemies. So we have here, as Brother Wakester puts it, moving from the closet of prayer to the field of conflict. It's a great way to put it, I think. Notice David speaks to God before he turns and speaks to men. And I'm not sure to whom he attributes the quote here, but it says, surely we should all speak the more boldly to men if we have had more constant conversation with God. He who dares to face his maker will not tremble before the sons of men. I think a lot of wisdom in that statement, from whoever said it. So David addresses them as sons of men, which would suggest that these are, at least in a worldly sense, great men of position, men of authority, and influence, though he obviously still considers them foolish in behavior. They may be powerful, they may be highly educated and high positions in the ways of the world, but that does not necessarily entail heavenly or godly wisdom. And how long, right? How long? The cry of humanity in distress. Sons of men, how long will you turn my glory into shame? Right? That's kind of reminiscent of Habakkuk, right? As he sees the wickedness round about him of the world and pleads with God. How long are you going to let this go on? But before you step in and do something about it. And if that sounds a bit presumptive on Habakkuk's part, it's because it is, and he's told so, and he ends up getting put in his place. But so here, David implores these sons of men, how long will you turn my glory into shame? How long will you love vanity and seek after leasing? It's an odd way to put it. The ASV has, how long will you love vanity and seek after falsehood? Okay, so again, perhaps this verse helps us to see how it fits the situation with Absalom, more specifically, this idea of turning his glory into shame. Because if this is the occasion where he's on the run from Absalom, there's been an attempt to rob David of his throne, to steal his power, to reduce him to a condition of, being an outcast and a beggar who's fled out into the wilderness, to preserve his life. So that would certainly fit, right? That is definitely an occasion in David's life when his glory had been turned into shame. And he might well address those responsible for it as in the sense of sons of men being, men of great power and position, because so many of David's own upper level officials had turned on him. So how long is this situation going to continue? How long are these men going to continue in this endeavor? And then on top of that, how long will you love vanity and seek after falsehood, right? How long are you going to be chasing after an empty and impracticable thing, right? It's a pointless endeavor. It's hopeless in the end. Ultimately, this endeavor that these sons of men are engaged in, that's troubling and vexing David so badly, is ultimately going to come to nothing. Well, how is that? Who's on David's side that isn't on their side? Right? Perhaps the overall point here. Jehovah hath set him apart, him that is godly. Right? So he draws a distinction in verse 3. Know that the Lord has set apart him that is godly for himself. The Lord will hear when I call unto him. He draws a distinction between the godly and the ungodly. Again, back to the point I was just making, how is it that the endeavor of these sons of men against David is something that could be described as vanity and falsehood? It's empty, it's pointless, it's going to come to naught. Verse 3 is the answer to that, right? Because David is godly, God is on his side, certainly not on the side. Again, if this is indeed the occasion of Absalom, God is certainly not on the side of those who had been part and parcel of that travesty. Stand in awe and sin not, which would be in contrast to what they have been doing, certainly. Commune with your own heart upon your own bed, and be still. So you might note that as mind your own business. Certainly they are engaged in something they ought not to be. Offer the sacrifices of righteousness and put your trust in the Lord. So the suggestion that those who are listening should offer sacrifices implies the need to atone for sin. Right? They have sinned in what they're doing against David. Hence verse 4, stand in awe and sin not. Right? They have been sinning. They need to stop sinning. Right? They need to go back. They need to mind their own business. Go back to their own home. Stop engaging in this vain and false exercise against David that has turned his glory into shame. And they need to offer sacrifices of righteousness and put their trust in the Lord. Having done so, they need to atone because they have very much been in the wrong for what they've been doing. Okay, verses 6 and 7. You have a contrast drawn between the source of joy and gladness for the two. There be many that say, "Who will show us any good? Lord, lift thou up the light of thy countenance upon us. Thou hast put gladness in my heart more than in the time that their corn and their wine increased." Where is joy to be found? Now remember, David, again, assuming what we do about the circumstance and the occasion for the writing of this psalm, he's on the run. He's out in the wilderness. His own son has turned against him, has usurped the throne. By and large, the people have gone along with it. Again, many of David's own leaders, not all of them, right? Some have accompanied David out into the wilderness fleeing from Absalom, but by and large, the majority, you go along to get along, right? They've gone along with Absalom. So David is in this terrible predicament, just like with Psalm 3. He's troubled, he's vexed, he's dealing with enemies, and yet, he can say something like this. He finds joy, and the joy that he has, even in this dire circumstance, is greater than that of his enemies, who may be seeing, they may be seeing some outward, some superficial, worldly success for their part. Their corn and wine have been increased. So it's kind of like that age-old question. Why do the wicked prosper? While the righteous suffer. And certainly in this life, it can seem that way at times. People who were evil, who were wicked, who were ungodly. They're out there, making money, accumulating property. They seem to be doing really well. Perhaps Psalm 4, 6, and 7 is a good thought to kind of pin down with regard to that. David's enemies have been seemingly succeeding, and yet, in addition to the fact that they've been in the wrong, and ultimately their scheme is, again, as he put it in verse 2, vain and false. It's going to come to naught in the end. They seem to be winning, right? We saw a similar thought back in Psalm 3, that things seem to be going well for them, and yet David is the one. When he draws this contrast over the sources of joy, David's joy comes from the Lord. He's not looking for it in physical things, right? Like all these men who have betrayed him and who are engaging in this sin against him. In the end, David is certainly going to come out on top. In verse 8, that's exactly where he concludes. I will both lay me down in peace and sleep, for thou, Lord, only makest me dwell in safety. So in light of all these things, despite the fact that he's in a bad situation, he knows how it's going to turn out. He has total confidence in God, and because of that, he's able to lay down in peace and sleep, despite the trouble. Okay, so a few lessons that we can take from this. For one thing, what a comfort it is to know that God is always near. That even, hopefully, if you're watching this, you haven't found yourself in a life situation quite as dire as David, right? Where there's been murder and political rebellion, and you've been driven out of a palace out into the wilderness. People are hunting you down to try to take your life. But even if it's not quite that bad, we can all sympathize, can we not? We have these times in our lives when you feel worn down, you feel defeated, you feel like you're beset by enemies on every front. Nothing's going the right way. This psalm is perfect. Perfect for that. Because despite David's situation, he has his confidence. He knows what the end game is. Even though it's not going his way right now, at the moment that he's writing this psalm, he knows how it's ultimately going to turn out because God is on his side, and he finds peace in that. So it's a wonderful psalm. Another lesson that you can take from this, there are two kinds of counsel, good and bad. And you can actually go back and read the account of Absalom's rebellion. right? Because there are some interesting bits in there regarding counsel, counsel from officials in the court to the king, both to David and to Absalom. Some good, some bad. These sons of men that he addresses in verse 2, right, as he's giving them advice as to what they should do, he's giving them counsel. They have been listening to the wrong kind. It may have seemed at the time that they listened to it, again, assuming these are men who have sided with Absalom against David, it may have seemed financially, politically, socially advantageous to them. Maybe they looked at the situation and thought, you know what, the wind is blowing in Absalom's direction. So, even though we like David, even though we understand maybe he's the legitimate king, we're going to settle with Absalom because it looks like Absalom's going to win and that's a better situation for us. Bad counsel. What is the good counsel? You find it right here. You find it right here. And in Psalm 3 and in any host of other Psalms in which the psalmist is expressing this kind of confidence in God, a willingness to do things the Lord's way, to seek after the Lord's will, even when things seem to be going poorly for him. Here's another one. The true source of joy is not found in material abundance, but in one's spiritual relationship with God. Again, the thought there is from verses 6 and 7. These sons of men, whoever they are, have been prospering, right? While the psalmist has been hunkered down, fending for his life as they're engaged in this campaign against him, their corn and wine have increased. Yet again, things seem to be going their way. But you have to look at the bigger picture. Where do you find true joy? It isn't in the increase of corn and wine. It's in the Lord. For one thing, because that's the only place you find the kind of peace and comfort that we find expressed in verse 8. But yet again, and I'll close with this thought, it comes back to the end of verse 2. The men who were seeking after those things, it's vanity and falsehood. Even if they succeed, it's only going to be in the short run. In the long run, God is going to come out on top, and God's people are going to come out on top. So that is Psalm 4. I hope you've enjoyed looking at it with me today. Lord willing, we will move on next week to Psalm 5. Thank you for your attention.
Over all the earth you reign on high, every mountain stream, every sunset sky. But my one request, Lord, my only aim, is that you reign in me again. Lord, reign in me, reign in your power, over all my dreams. In my darkest hour, you are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? Over every thought, over every word, may my life reflect the beauty of my Lord. 'Cause you mean more to me than any earthly thing. So won't you reign in me again? Lord, reign in me, reign in your power, over all my dreams. In my darkest hour, you are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? Lord, reign in me, reign in your power, over all my dreams. In my darkest hour, you are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? You are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? You are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? You are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? You are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? You are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? You are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? You are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? You are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? You are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? You are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? You are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? You are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? You are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? You are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? You are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? You are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? You are the Lord of all